Williams questiona os resultados e a eficácia das chamadas ações afirmativas e das cotas raciais nos Estados Unidos, que começaram a ser implementadas no fim dos anos 60, durante o governo de Richard Nixon. Ele vai além. Diz que os negros dos Estados Unidos, ele é contra o uso do termo afro-americano, se prejudicam porque essas ações afirmativas reforçam os estereótipos raciais e desestimulam a iniciativa própria. Com fama de encrenqueiro quando jovem, o professor Walter Williams se rebelou contra a obrigatoriedade de servir ao exército. Foi parar na corte marcial por ter sido um dos primeiros a questionar as leis Jim Crow, um conjunto de leis segregacionistas que vigoravam no sul dos Estados Unidos até 1964, antes de serem suspensas pelo famoso Ato dos Direitos Civis. Foi esse ex-encrenqueiro, hoje respeitável senhor de 74 anos, que recebeu a equipe do milênio em sua sala, na Universidade George Mason.
Professor Williams,
Yes.
when you were a private in the United States Army, you were an activist against Jim Crow. You wrote letters to the White House. Why did you do that?
Well, I've always been a radical, and I've always valued individual liberty. And what I saw as, this is like in 1959, and I was sent to Fort Stewart, Georgia, which is in the southern part of the United States, and there was gross discrimination, and I felt I had to take it on.
Good results, bad results. I think you almost got court-martialed because
No,
of
I
that.
did get court-martialed, but I won. Yeah, they set me up. I was quite a troublemaker, and so they framed me, and so. But however, I had some evidence, and I made a fool out of the company commander, who indeed brought court-martial charges against me.
What was your argument, not only against the commander, but what was your argument in the letters?
My argument was, essential argument was, is that what obligation do I owe to defend the country if I do not have the same rights as everybody else has? And that was essentially the argument. And I saw that I did not have the same constitutional guarantees as everybody else did, and I wanted to know what was my obligation in light of that.
You were a distraction. You were a problem for your superiors.
Yes, I was a troublemaker. And then, but however, I was drafted. Matter of fact, I don't call it a draft. I call it a confiscation of labor services. That is, I was driving a taxi cab in Philadelphia making good money, $400 a month, which was very good in 1959, and then I got a letter which essentially said you're going to stop making $400 a month and start making $68 a month. And normally people don't switch voluntarily in that direction, so they're just taking my labor services.
You have, for many years, defended the theory that laws of affirmative action actually started with Lyndon Johnson, 65, if I'm not wrong.
No, actually, no. No, it started with Richard Nixon in 1968. Richard Nixon pushed that was the first time we had affirmative action legislation written in our country.
First executive order wasn't in
No. We didn't, at least we didn't call it affirmative action. Affirmative action arose during the Nixon administration.
You grew up in Pennsylvania,
in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia, in a poor neighborhood.
Yes.
You grew up during the Jim Crow laws. The discrimination against blacks in the United States was pervasive. It lasted forever, and essentially prevented many segments of the black population from having the tools necessary to advance. You don't think that giving those tools as an advantage is correct?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And matter of fact, I think that one thing that people need to realize is that if you look at black Americans today, that is, if you just thought of black Americans as a separate nation, we would be if you looked at what we produce each year, our income, we would be the 14th or 15th richest nation that faces Earth. Some black Americans are some of the richest people in the world. Some are the most famous people in the world. And it was a black American who was the commander-in-chief of the mightiest army in the world, namely Colin Powell. And now we have a president. Now, the point is, the significance of this is that if you go back to 1865, when the Civil War was over, neither a slave nor a slave owner would have believed that this kind of progress would have been possible in a little bit over 100 years.
Now,
and that speaks well of a nation where these gains were possible. They would not have been possible anywhere else in the world, and it speaks very well of the intestinal fortitude of a people who made these gains.
So let's take your timeline. Nixon, the beginning of affirmative action. The progress made by blacks from the end of the Civil War until the Nixon administration in the 70s, and the progress made from the Nixon administration to today. Was the progress better, bigger, before affirmative action?
Well, there's a colleague of mine, Finus Welch, and he's done extensive work researching here, and he points that the progress that black Americans made from 1940 to 1960 was greater than the progress that blacks made between 1960 and 1980. What was necessary was to get rid of the most abusive discriminatory laws. It was not discrimination. For example, blacks, at one time, blacks were not in basketball at all, professional basketball. Today, blacks are 80% of the players. They were not in football. Today, they're 60% of the players. And it was not affirmative action.
Now,
it was just being very, very good.
Now, see this from the point of view of the argument. We're talking about physics ability that define a genetic progression. Well, genetic progression, it's a different progression than economic opportunity progression, intellectual progression. So when you talk about the fact that without affirmative action, blacks have done very well in some fields like basketball, isn't that a little different from doing well in a field?
If you look at the question, you say, look, you add up the amount of earnings that black Americans earn each year, and it's very significant. We'll be the 14th or 15th richest nation in the world if you just thought of us as a nation. That is a tremendous gain, and I doubt whether you can attribute it to affirmative action.
You would eliminate it today, quotas and all?
Yes, I would, because I think that there's, well, number one, I think that quotas themselves are unfair. But number two, they don't act in the favor of the people who are so-called beneficiaries of quotas. That is, for example, many colleges have quotas, and so what they do, like Harvard and Yale and MIT, they recruit black people to their school, black students, and these are high-powered schools, and many times the black students flunk out because they cannot compete. And if they came to some other school that was not as high-powered, they would get through. And so a lot of times affirmative action works against the people who are said to be beneficiaries of it.
If I don't have a school when I'm a kid, if I don't have a high school later on, or a college to go to, how could I compete? Isn't that fair that I have some? I mean,
well, if you look at just, I'm not telling everybody look at my life, but if you look at my life, I grew up. I was born in the middle of the Depression, the Great Depression of the country, gross discrimination, and the way that I was able to compete with my colleagues is that, let's say when I went to UCLA, I got my doctorate at UCLA, and UCLA was ranked number 10 in terms of quality of schools in the country. What it meant is that because my education wasn't as good as the other guys there, it meant that I had to work harder. That is, I had to study longer. But I didn't get any special favors. I just studied, you know, like maybe a guy who had a rich family, who went to middle class schools, maybe he got his assignment done in an hour. And maybe it took me 5 hours to do the same assignment. But the bottom line was, it was done.